good.
Okay, I think we're going to begin our meeting March 25th, 2025, Budget Advisory Committee. I'm Peter Eckel.
Laura Cooper, BAC.
Tyson Thornburg, Budget and Financial.
Julien, and Deputy City Manager.
Steve Ward, Council Liaison.
Rita Russell, Council Liaison.
Kennetha Julien, Court Administrator.
James Horan, Budget Advisory Committee.
David Mondo, Budget Advisory.
Those online.
Sean Lewis, City Manager.
Jay Knight, Budget Advisory Committee.
Wonderful. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from the February 25th BAC meeting?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 You. And we'll move on to the municipal court presentation from Court Administrator Kennetha Julien.
Thank you. Nice, in a second to get me situated.
Take your time. No rush, no rush.
Either way is fine. Well, as indicated, I'm Kennetha Julien, the Court Administrator of our municipal court. We will discuss today the outcome area and our municipal court overview of our 2024 budget. And we have our outcome. So just indicating for the strategic plan in reference to safety, our safety mechanisms, but the mission of the Englewood Municipal Court to ensure justice and dignity with dignity for all. All of a sudden my tongue is not working. As the court of the community, we're here to provide resolution for local disputes. Knowing our community and the needs of our citizens, we offer court navigation, restorative justice, and a court services resource officer to assist our customers in successful compliance of their sentences efficiently, effectively, and locally. And which it leads into, yes, go ahead, Tyson, which leads into our mission statement. As you all have seen this a number of times, to ensure dignity with all is our mission. Our values to be impartial, accountable, welcoming, and respectful, which gains that trustworthiness. Our goals, safeguarding individual rights, providing efficient, effective, and fair service to our customers, promoting our rehabilitative and restorative opportunities, collaborating with our community partners, and enhancing public safety. Next slide, Tyson. Now we will get to the overview. Again, not much has changed in this slide in the last 2 years that I have presented it to you all. Indicated our mission, ensuring safety and community needs are met through fair and efficient judicial processes and programming. While punitive sanctions are appropriate in a number of cases, we do recognize that many individuals have instances or interactions with law enforcement due to mental health, substance abuse, being unhoused, or other personal matters, personal complications that lead them to that. And so with the ability of funding and those types of things from our council, we've been able to provide rehabilitative and restorative justice options to help improve the individual and community outcomes and concerns of the citizens of Englewood. Our municipal court, in reference to revenues, we have increased in 2024 due to an increase in our parking tickets. We anticipate revenues to remain fairly level for 2025 unless parking ticket and or general offense filings can continue to increase or do increase. Our general offense filings, when we get to that slide, you'll see are pretty low. I think part of that is we did domestic violence up until about a year ago with some communication with the city attorney's office and the police department. And so due to some of the state sanctioning and those types of things. So we'll see where that leads us. Again, as I always tend to remind, revenues are a byproduct of court conducting business. They're not the purpose of the judicial system. Fines and fees are allocated per code as set and determined and assessed by the judge based on the individual case and circumstances. Our organizational structure in the court is obviously the people elect presiding Judge Joe Jefferson as our elected judge. We have 4 associate judges who participate or assist in court for Sunday hearings, because we do Sunday hearings due to the legislative mandate of 48-hour bond hearings. And then they also cover if there's illness, vacation, conferences, or any other reason that judge would need to be out of the office. I'm the court administrator. I oversee, and I don't know what that blank line goes to, just everybody, I guess. I think I rule the world some days. Oh, I see, we didn't drop down the one. So we have Evan Brenrick, who is our deputy court administrator. He oversees our four court specialists. We do have a vacant court specialist. We've been very conservative over the last couple years. In fact, the last 2 years that I came before you all, we had 3 court specialists. When we saw the increase in the parking tickets and that type of thing, we needed to go back and increase our court specialists. And so we did hire the one, so we have 4, but we do have 1 vacancy that we have kept for vacancy savings, as well as just making sure that we are keeping a good balance on the staff that we have and the workloads that we have. Ames Stenson is our restorative justice program manager. Christy Mises is our community service justice coordinator and probation officer. And then we have our court navigator, and that position is vacant for right now. It became vacant when our court navigator became the city prosecutor. And in that restructure, we were looking at just again, making sure that we have the right fit. We'd had a part-time navigator for a very long time. We went to a full-time navigator, trying to assess that. And then we also got some grant funding that's going to assist in that area as well. So just wanting to make sure that we're capturing the proper needs. Next slide, Texan. Thank you. And now I see this is somewhat hard for you all to read, but it is the year-end reports over the last almost 5 years. And you will see that we were kind of near the thousands, and then we dipped down. We did come back up this year in comparison to 2020, which was one of the highest in the last 5 years. But as you can see, we've eked up about 1.5 times what we had been in the last 3 years that had leveled off. And a lot of that, again, is due to the parking ticket increase, as well as the traffic infractions. And I know that's been an area that council has, you know, made concern, I guess, with the police department. So we are seeing an uptick in that. And I know now that they have the staffing, they have been focusing on those areas, and we're seeing that in our caseload. Our hearings also went up. Some are appearing for arraignments and setting trials, and then hearings. We have a number of hearings. As you see, stayed fairly level with the hearings. Our arraignments have gone up as well. So that's what you'll see in that area. As you will notice, our bench warrants have increased since the last year, but still steady if you evaluate it over time. 2020 obviously was the highest, with COVID, that being a COVID year. I think we had a lot of failure to appears and the bench warrants being issued. This year, we still see a high number of bench warrants, so there is a high number, that 807 out of, 6,300 cases, or 5171, well, those are the hearings. So out of the 6,300 cases, 807 bench warrants. Percentage-wise, and Kevin's better at percentages than I am, probably not a huge percentage, but still we would love to see that number come down. And we're working on that with our online payment portal and different things. We are getting people to take notice of those areas. And as you can see, our revenue did come up from last year. And so again, it's up over the last 2 years, but it's about very close to where we were in 2021, and still only about half of where we were in 2020. Yes, sir.
Real quick question. Difference between a traffic infraction and a traffic offense?
Offense is usually related to an accident.
Oh.
So if they did an action that resulted in an accident, it usually becomes a traffic offense. Or if it is speeding over, I believe it's 25 miles an hour over the speed limit now, becomes an offense. Okay. Thanks. As you can see, also some of the numbers that we are wanting to make sure that you're aware of is our restorative justice program, cases referred, and this is since the program has been initiated, or no, I'm sorry, this was our 2024 specific numbers. Cases referred to RJ was 96. That is, all of our juvenile cases tend to get referred to restorative justice program, as do our minor criminal offenses. They had 47 conferences. They have 73 contracts pending, and that number, while it seems a little misleading because there's 97 cases, it's the rollover from the previous year. And then the accountability contracts completed is 53. So that's of the people that had conferences, signed contracts, and then successfully completed are that 53 in 24. And then having a total of 68 volunteers that participate in that program, which is amazing. Ames has done a really great job of recruiting and getting people to participate and help with those the community circles in which they give input and give some ideas and help people to realize the impact of their actions on the community. And of those volunteers, 8 of them have completed the facilitator training, which is very helpful because at some point that will help alleviate Ames from doing all of those facilitations and will allow volunteers to be able to do those as well. In our probation area, we had in 2024, 37 cases that were open, 25 were closed. Those, again, are something that continues because you can have multiple months of probation. It's not usually like a month or 2 months. Sometimes it can be 6 months, sometimes it can be a year. So it just depends on what that cycle would look like. And those are the supervised cases. And 21 of those successfully completed, meaning they did all of their fines, all of their community service, all of those things. Unsupervised cases tend to be what we also lump as conditionals. So it's you will remain free at large so long as you don't commit any other crimes, you don't go near, if you were trespassing or you shoplifted at Walmart, you don't go near the Walmart for this 1 year, then that's a conditional, and then as long as you complete that year, then your case will be successfully completed. And of those, there were 270 of them. There were 232 of those closed, and 139 of them were successfully completed. Many of those are also money onlys. So if they were to get a fine that they need to pay, and if they did not, then it would not be successfully completed, and those get referred to collections. You saw some of those numbers. Court navigation, again, about middle of 2024, our court navigator moved on, but our probation and court services resource officer kind of filled in and did the intermediate work. And so we did have 149 clients utilize the court navigation services. That person then had contact with those persons or others 295 times, and they were able to refer those persons and others to other resource providers, whether it be for food, for IDs, anything that would help them to get back on track 251 times. And then they were able to reach out to our warrants, persons with warrants or a failure to appear folks. At least 44 of those were notified of, hey, you have a pending warrant and you might want to take care of that. We are happy to say that our online portal, again, this was not being utilized to its fullest potential since it came back online. We have seen quite the uptick, probably mid-year and then into 2025. But as you can see, for 2024, we had 1,044 cases paid online. Most of those are parking payments, which are easy to do online. You don't have to accept or reject a plea and those types of things. So they're very easy to pay. But often we do also get people that will take pleas on there and they think about and accept traffic school. And so then they have to come in person and pay those. So then once they do that, they tend not to pay on the portal. Next slide, Tyson. So those are our metrics, and you can see we've been working really hard. So for 2024, we had a 1.4 million budget. We used about 1.1, returning about $250,000. Our commodities, we had an amended budget of 18,700, and we utilized 12,600 of that, again, returning about 6,000. And then our contractual professional services, which includes our court appointed counsel, our mandatory court appointed bond hearing counsel, which again, those are 6 days a week. It also includes our interpreters, as well as our, we use interpreters. We also use language line. I'm trying to think if there are other, if we have some contractual, if we assign somebody to counseling or substance abuse evaluation or something to that effect and they are indigent, then we do have some monies that provide some assistance with that, and that falls into that bucket. So we had roughly 239,000 allotted for that. We spent about 200 of it, returning 40,800 roughly. And I'm saying roughly, those numbers are the accurate numbers, but just for speaking terms, I'm just rounding them and saying roughly. So out of the 1.6 of our amended budget, we used about 1.3 and we returned almost 300,000. So overall, and again, some of that was due to the number of cases. Parking cases tend to resolve. You don't have a lot of court-appointed counsel. You don't have to provide them counsel. Of the cases where we did utilize that, when we do have our general offense cases and that type of thing, because they can be possibly sanctioned to jail time, they are entitled to counsel. On the bond hearings, they're always entitled to counsel. That's statutorily required. If it is a hearing outside of that, then they have to determine that they are indigent, and then they're given court-appointed counsel. And in our area, our population, a lot of them are unhoused and or unemployed, and so they do tend to qualify for that. And so that's what a lot of that budget is. Our accomplishments, as you heard me say, our e-court, we continue to work to make that a robust case management system for ourselves, including an increased use of our online payment portal. We are working on an interface. We have an interface with DMV so that we can get information sent to us directly from DMV in reference to driver's licenses and driver's histories, so that the prosecutor can see that and make reasonable plea offers based on the information that's provided. Then we also are able to send that information back. So once they do pay for fines or fees, that kind of thing, or if they're convicted, then we can send that back, and those points are assessed by DMV right away. So that's an interaction through an interface with our online management system. We are working, and the money was already in the IT budget from our initial project with eCourt, is our Brazos. And so what that will do is allow the EPD takes down the tickets and they put it into a system called Brazos. Brazos will then communicate with eCourt and download that information. So hopefully the purpose of it is to reduce the manual labor of data entry. And so it will hopefully will help streamline that and make that process more efficient. And if that continues, even with a case increase, we may be able to not have to increase the caseload for an additional person at that point. We are happy to say that our restorative justice program manager, Ames, as well as Arnie Shenison, who was our court nav at the time, had applied and successfully received a JAG grant. It's a Department of Justice grant that's filtered through the state monies. And so that $86,000 is to allow for some part-time assistance, administrative assistance for the restorative justice program, as well as for the court navigation, as well as monies for to conduct a survey to really delve into what the needs of our population are in reference to housing, mental health, those types of things. So there's monies put into the grant specifically to capture that survey. Our TV grant, we got $800 worth of bus passes. We got that in 2024, and I'm happy to say we got it again in 2025. And what that does is when we have defendants who need to get out to the county court, or they need to go for their counseling session, or they need to go for their evaluation, if they do not have transportation or funding, we can then provide them with these grant allotted bus passes so that they can use the bus to get there. I will say that we had a number of them that we actually ended up sharing with the library especially on cold weather days, to get people to the housing that they needed during those cold weather events. An expanded relationship with Denver and other county jails to provide virtual appearances to ensure public safety, reduce costs, and improve efficiency. As indicated, we have what I would consider a high number of failure to appears. We are not alone. This is a national epidemic in reference to the failures to appear. But with that high number, once they get picked up in other jurisdictions, historically, you would have them transported back to your jurisdiction. Obviously, that's not the most efficient or effective way. There's safety issues, there's cost, those types of things. So we've been working with our other jurisdictions to see when that happens, if we are able to do those appearances virtually. We had been successful with a couple of counties prior to. Denver is coming around a little bit to working on that. We still need to work with Jeffco to see if we can make that happen. But it is exciting that other counties are really considering and helping us to do that, because a lot of times you can resolve a case, they can do especially if it's credit for time served or something like that, they can just get it resolved and then they're able to leave whenever they're resolved with it, whatever they're dealing with in that particular county or location that they're being held. Restorative justice expansion. Ames has been working with Littleton and is also now reaching out in reference to Sheridan to see about providing services. And some of it, in the beginning, it was more Ames doing a lot of these services, but they have come on board and they actually have one of their members learning from Ames in order to be able to do those things. And we're working on an MOU so that they're providing a fee for those services that are being provided. And it's been an exciting time for Ames in learning more about Littleton, also more about Sheridan, but getting involved in that, and then also working with the volunteers in those areas and getting more volunteer involvement to help those cities to capture the greatness that we have with our RJ program. Community outreach, obviously, we do attend a lot of the national night outs, the block parties, the events, and different events that are here through the court and then also through restorative justice. Ames usually has a percentage of those that they attend each year, trying to recruit more volunteers. We reach out and use those opportunities to educate about the court, obviously build that public trust and just make sure that people are aware. You'd be surprised at how many times you go and they'll say, oh, there's a court here, not realizing that we do have a community court. Judge Jefferson was elected to president of the Colorado Municipal Judges Association. He's been in line for a couple of those roles and then has been president this year. He will turn over that reign in October, I believe. And then I also was very fortunate to be able to attend the National Association of Court Managers and became a court executive, a certified court executive. So thank you all for that opportunity. And then challenges faced, some from last year, some that are rolling over into this year, but the mandatory PR bond from legislative measures and unfunded mandates. The mandatory PR bonds, as again, I've indicated, we have those failure to appears, we arrest them, they finally get caught or held, they're taken to jail, and then we see them and we have to release them on a personal recognizance because the state has mandated that certain levels of crimes, you can't hold them for a bond or anything to that extent, you need to let them go. And we do that and we give them a date to come back, and unfortunately sometimes it just creates this vicious cycle because then they don't show back up, then they get another failure to appear, and then they get held again. So again, that's some of the legislative mandates, and it becomes frustrating and it makes the numbers look kind of different, but hopefully the legislature will work through some of those and change some of their thoughts on that. There is some proposed legislation about if you have multiple failure to appears, you'll be able to take that into consideration, and if there are, then make a small cash bond, such as $25 or $50, to at least hold them till you can at least see them and have conversation to see if they want to resolve their case. There is sentencing limits under review by the Supreme Court, the legislature, and our city council in reference to municipal courts mirroring state court sentencing. Some of that is, does state court really know what's needed in a local community? And again, not to be extreme, I don't think anybody's asking for that, but is, a 10-day or a 5-day reasonable within a locality where the state is only doing 3 because they just don't have the manpower, the time, or the will to figure things out, or to really resolve what people are needing in those times. Obviously, the requirement to have prompt hearings for individuals. So that has, this 48-hour requirement for the bond hearings has been specifically in your jurisdiction. So if they're held outside your jurisdiction, they can be let out on their PR bond, or if it's cash bond, they can pay and move along. In your own jurisdiction, if it's within that 40 hours, you need to have a prompt bond hearing. They are now, the legislature is looking at making that in anywhere in the state. So if one of our defendants was held in Jeffco or held in Pueblo, we would need to mandate that we would be available on that Sunday to have those hearings. And then there is some unclear items in some of the legislation in reference to, will that also include, lost my train of thought there. Oh, will it also require court-appointed counsel for all cases? So whether you're indigent or not, if you're in a municipal court case, you would be entitled to court-appointed counsel. And that would increase that professional services line in the future. The unclear future of municipal criminal enforcement. Obviously, there is discretion to send cases to city or county. We talked about domestic violence. It had been coming to the city. I think there's been some direction and choice to send it to the county, which causes some other things. The inconvenience to the citizens. You'd be amazed at how many people show up at our counter and going, what do you mean I got to go to the county to take care of this? Why can't I just take care of it here? This is my court. This is where I want to deal with it. And especially even some of the unhoused, they recognize it's like, oh, at least I could take care of it here. I don't need to go all the way over to Peoria to do that. So it causes them to travel. Longer periods to resolve matters. We have a speedy timeline of 91 days. If it goes to county, they, to some extent, have unlimited. They have 180 unless you waive. Because they have so many cases and public defenders, they tend to waive pretty rapidly, and so cases do take longer to resolve at county court, statistically. Not all, but statistically. And then the lack of resources, somewhat on both sides. We have, municipal courts are a little more limited when we're finding that we have somebody that is mentally incompetent. And so sometimes county is able to assist in those areas. But when it comes to being able to see what the need is and what our community has available, the city court is able to handle that a little better. Like we know we have restorative justice and we can handle those matters here locally, or counseling with All Health. We have a lot of those resources, 5280, others that provide those resources, and we know about them here. And so with the number of people that we serve here, we're able to manage that correctly and just have that hometown feel. Whereas when people get sent over to Arapahoe County, it's the term that tends to be used and don't mean it to be disrespectful, but they cattle call. Like they bring in hundreds of people at one time for hearings and then shuffle them through and then weed them out in those ways. And so there is definitely a benefit of having your own community court and having those issues resolved here. What we run into in reference is obviously public trust. We have an increased failure to appear. People just do not show up for court. It doesn't really matter. I don't think they either understand or care anymore about what the consequences are. Lack of compliance with the law. People have repeated offenses, and a disregard for authority, whether it be the court or for police. They just don't feel the need that they have to come and resolve their matters or take their matters seriously. And so we run into that. So again, we are out in the community educating the community, others. We try to educate our defendants when they come in reference to these issues, and hopefully continue to build that community trust and the need for the community court. And I think that's all I had. So any questions or comments?
On the legislative mandates and unfunded portion related to those, there seems to be a lot of new legislative impetus for the state. How are we lobbying or representing ourselves on Capitol Hill to help, enforce our home rule authority and also bargain or put our own interest in so that our state representatives are aware of our struggles?
That's a great question. CMJA, which Judge Jefferson is involved with, they have lobbyists, and also CML is a participant in that. I know City Attorney's Office works closely with CML. I shouldn't say works closely, but I know they're involved with CML also in reference to issues and ideas that come forward. The council then meets and gives some direction to City Attorney on what we want to lobby for and the things that we don't. Some initiatives that are carried forward. So there is talk, and we do have associations that are doing that for us. We don't have our own lobbyists that are doing that, but a lot of those topics are brought to council, and then council makes determination of some positions that they may have on some of those and where they would like to see or comments made or feedback given to the legislature on those.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your new, designation?
Oh, my certification?
Yes.
Yes, it was an opportunity to just take courses in reference to court management. So understanding more of the metrics, understanding the public trust and the needs of promoting, I don't know if that's the exact word, but really just engaging with the community, learning, being transparent, making sure that that people understand what the court's for and what we do. Also, some of the internal personnel management, there's courses in reference to that, as well as just case management, and then looking at some of those, as well as court security. You would be amazed at, or I was anyway, at the need and the necessity for that as we see different things happening in reference to accessibility. People that come into the court that can be dangerous, and how you're doing that and support and doing those types of things, as well as accessibility. Access to justice is a huge component in looking at that and making sure that our court is feeding the needs of that realm. Are people able to see and hear and understand when they come into court? Are we making sure, again, through the interpreters, that they understand in the language that they completely understand and can feel comfortable with? We have found that we have a Spanish-speaking clerk that is able to help us translate when we have, and we have seen an increase of Spanish-speaking individuals come to our counter, and you can see them become a little relieved that there's somebody that speaks their language that can help them to really and truly understand. Because even for English-speaking people, when you come into court, it's like going into a hospital or into the back of a cop car. It's a new environment, and it's a totally different language that you don't understand. And so it's scary and it's apprehensive. And so to be able to come into a court where somebody does speak your language and you can have that feeling of, okay, somebody understands me, it helps a lot. So all of those courses that I was able to learn, start applying that to our court and take us into the future. So
Wonderful. Well, we think it's great that you got that, and also Judge Jefferson's appointment as well. So it's, you all provide an invaluable service to our community.
thank you very much.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Are you actively looking to fill the court navigator vacancy, and what's that process like?
So we are looking to fill it. We are still cautiously approaching what that will look like in the overall scheme. Like I said, we started with a part-time, we went to full-time and felt that need. Then the caseload kind of shifted and the population shifted a little. So we kind of were reluctant to just jump back in and do full-time. With the grant, we will get somebody for 20 hours that can help in that role. We're also wanting to make sure that we evaluate, because what we have learned along the way is some of the overlap. We had like a food pantry and some socks and hygiene packs and different things that we made sure that we had for the court navigator to use as resources for our clients, where we also found that the library had similar tools and resources. And so we don't want to be we don't want everyone to have all these different places or needs and things that they have to go to. So it's working with some of them. I'm working with Carrie in the library, and then Tony, who's our event director, that is able to capture a lot of resources for us as far as socks and those types of things, and just figure out like what is our best need, as well as we now have a Tri-Cities kind of navigator and looking at that and seeing what those resources are. So we want to be wise with our dollars and not be wasteful. So we're just trying to make sure that we're not being too duplicative in various other places, but we do want to make sure that we have somebody there when people come in their time of need with courts. So I know that's not a real direct answer, but.
Regarding the funds that were returned for contractors, what were some of the contributors to the relatively significant amount of those funds that were returned? Is that something that we might see changing going into the next fiscal cycle?
That also is a great answer or question. Thank you. Some of it has to do with the caseload because it had kind of dipped down and then coming back up. So some of that will just juxtapose upon what we have in relation to cases and where we're seeing some of those events occurring. I would say probably more of our interpreter costs went up and some of our court navigation for the actual in-court cases went down slightly in the variation of that number. But then, of course, our Sunday court hearing, that did go up some. So we'll see some of that fluctuation for when you see it come through in 25 and then seeing what that will build into for 26.
Thank you.
Any other questions, concerns?
Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I love coming to this group. It's never an issue.
We'd like to hear that. Okay, we're going to move into sales and use tax. What I'd like to get to today on the sales and use tax discussion is reach an agreement so that we can decide on what we want to provide the police department specifically in terms of regards to the audit for the citizens who voted to pass this sales and use tax increase. I'm going to start real quickly by reading what we wrote in the report last year, and then I'm going to read the ballot language so that we just have a firm understanding where we're starting. And then I'd like to move into just coming to an agreement and ideas as to what we should ask the police department for in terms of their what I'll call accounting methodology and reporting is for those sales tax dollars that are funding alternative policing. Sales and use tax expenditure review. In 2022, the citizens of Inglewood voted on and approved 2 measures impacting the city's sales and use tax. One of these measures increased the city's sales and use tax by 20 basis points to repave, repair, maintain, and improve city streets and roads. The other measure raised the city's sales and use tax by 10 basis points to fund alternative policing services to address matters including homelessness, mental health, and addiction. The measures include language describing the expenses utilizing these funds would be reviewed by a citizen committee, which City Council designated to be this committee. These taxes were officially implemented in 2023, and this year the Budget Advisory Committee reviewed the audited expenditures presented by the Public Works Department and Inglewood Police Department. The funds raised by these tax measures are dedicated and must be used for specific purposes approved by the voters. As part of the review process, the City of Inglewood staff put together a document which showed all of the staff proposed expenses that the 2 new dedicated sales and use tax measures were proposed to be used for. The committee recognizes the effort that City of Inglewood staff and City Council have put into utilizing these dedicated funds for the benefit of the public and explicit purposes approved in the referendum. The committee asked for the talented staff of the City of Inglewood to take steps wherever possible to define, specify, and differentiate these dedicated funds from others, to specify that they have been used for the explicit purposes approved by the voters and City Council. The committee believes that the additional clarity and communication around these funds and their documentation is critical to demonstrating to the public that the City of Inglewood and their council have been good and appropriate shepherds of public funds and taxpayer dollars. And with that, the language specifically relating to the alternative policing was passed is, shall City of Inglewood taxes be increased not more than $978,455, annually beginning in January 1st, 2023, and by such amounts as are raised annually thereafter by an additional sales and use tax of 10 or 0.1% or an increase of approximately 1/10 of 1 cent per dollar spent to the current sales and use tax rate of 3.5 cents per dollar spent, excluding the sale of food for domestic home consumption, to fund alternative policing services to address matters including homelessness, mental health, and addiction. With all spending and such revenues reported in the city's annual independent audit, published on the city's website, and reviewed by a citizen committee, and shall the resulting revenue and investment earnings thereon be allowed to be collected, retained, and spent by the city, notwithstanding any limitations of Article 10, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution or any other law. And that was passed. So with that, Tyson, would you mind pulling up that the PDF or the Excel report that shows this breakdown for us?
Let me know if that's big enough.
That's big enough for me.
And this is the version that Nevin sent out with the additional column, the number of positions in FTE equivalents.
Great. So if we can scroll down to, I think we're okay with the mill and overlay project. Is that correct? I mean, we provided the streets and the blocks that they were completed. Do you believe that meets our expectation?
That works for what I was looking at. I think we should, keep in touch with council and if you are hearing feedback that, we're in need of additional communication from the public. I think we can change that, but otherwise I think it definitely adds another level of clarity just to have that seems to work for me as long as everyone else feels pretty comfortable with it.
Great. Okay, so moving forward to where I thought we were going to be, and that was the policing, alternative policing, and essentially how can we put together something that goes above and beyond or provides more depth and clarity than a full-time employee's percentage. And so I'd like to just open it up. Nevin, you kind of have become our in-house sales and use tax expert, so maybe you want to start, but whoever wants to talk first and just provide some ideas on what do you think is something that we can provide them or ask them for this month that just says, hey, in reviewing this year and in compliance with what we believe as a city's appointed citizens committee, we want to make sure that the public is provided with X and Y that discloses the specifics of where their sales and use tax dollars were spent.
I guess the first thing maybe before we get into other ideas, just since we have this format up, is everyone okay with us adopting this format with the additional column as the official format? And that being separating the number of positions in FTE equivalency from the described services provided column. I know we've talked about it, but I don't think you've ever officially said, yep, we're going forward from now on, this is it. So I just want to double check that before we move on.
Just a point of clarification for me. This is a public-facing document, so if a citizen were to ask, this would be the report that would be provided to them. Okay, great.
And it's published online.
That's correct.
So even without asking, people have access to this.
And when you mention column, you're specifically referring to column H?
Column H is new. Column H and G used to be one column last year. And that was something that we talked at length about there being confusion. And last year, there was some frustration because not only there was frustration about a couple areas. One, the relative formatting of the FTEs were not similar. Two, for some of these line items, we got a description, right? You can see in line number 12, you see mental health, call diversion, mobile response unit. But as you can see, a lot of them were just kind of one FTE at, this percentage or
X FTEs. So the idea is trying to encourage to get that additional description for the line items so that we still have the accounting of like how many people are doing this and, you know, how much of their time is spent doing this, but also have a better opportunity and set the expectation that, hey, we're looking for a little bit more descriptive detail in addition to that.
And I would say it's more than encouragement. I think it's really a request that happen. And that's something that I brought up, I think, our first year when we looked at this. You know, and I have some sense of this because I have the honor of serving on this committee. But if I'm a citizen who doesn't come to these meetings, zone policing, what does that mean exactly? An impact team, what does that mean? So I think you're exactly right. I think even for us who do have a little bit more than a lay person's knowledge of these terms, it would be helpful to have more if we're really to be able to offer an assessment of, yes, we believe you met the letter and the spirit of the initiative that was passed.
And to that point, this is a public facing document, right? So people are gonna want to you know, be able to look at it and immediately know what we're talking about, or at least get a sense.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a very burdensome. I mean, as you pointed out, there are areas where they talk about, you know, recreational vehicle issues and help with camp cleanup. Great, that helps me understand what a park ranger or that park ranger or portion of a park ranger does, right?
Absolutely. So first, in my notes, just so that I can share these, and we agree, is that, we'll get back to FTEs, but request that additional descriptions be provided for this specific program and or project title.
Yeah, just, you know, fill out column G.
Great, and we could just put that on a separate sheet or something that just says terminology of zone policing means.
Or even just like, I think just fill out column G. Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, like, it doesn't need to be like a full definition. It's just like, what kind of activities?
Okay.
I mean, if people want a full description, I think that's worth considering as an ask if that's something you're looking for. Is that?
Well, I mean, I can get my dictionary out and look what zone policing is, but I don't think it hurts to put a just brief description.
Yeah.
And activities include.
Exactly. Because like there's zone policing and then there's like, okay, what does that mean for the officers that are doing that here in Englewood, right? Like, you know, zone policing, they're policing the zone, but what are they doing when they do that, right? That's what I'm hoping to get out of.
Okay, and truthfully, they've already done it in almost half
In about
of the rows. So it's just asking that they be consistent in completing that column. Yeah.
Okay.
So not to sound like a broken record, but are we all in favor? Does anybody object to us adapting this as our official format for this? I mean, we can make additional changes, but adding column H.
No, any objections to that?
Do we need an actual motion on that to adopt this format?
I don't believe we do.
Okay.
No objections, so I think we agree, we'll adopt that. What's next, Nevin? So the title descriptions and activities?
The only other like really kind of like a proposal that we've gotten is just your request for data in each of those specific categories that are explicitly called out. Do we want to ask for any specifics, or is it just like how many cases annually or monthly do we get that touch each of those? Because I imagine there's some overlap, right?
Yeah.
Or do we kind of want to leave that up to the police department's discretion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think speaking to that, when I return to the wording of the ballot measure, the kind of three areas that are mentioned are homelessness, mental health, and addiction. And my suggestion or desire would be that we ask the police department to just supply some of the metrics they have in each of those categories. I'm not sure, since I wasn't around for the last time, how prescriptive we need to be about that. But you know, I know they're collecting a lot, and so if we're able to just, ask for some in the categories that the ballot measure says that it's going towards, I would be content with that.
So let me ask, so when you say homelessness, mental health, addiction, you're looking for some criteria that would then, they would be able to essentially say this was homelessness and mental health. We had a case, there's one case for each of those, or what do you mean?
That's a great question. Some of the metrics that they had provided in the safety report to the Elevate in Woolwood had included like the number of drug offenses, the unique contacts with co-responders. So there was a very, like an extensive list, and so it feels like some of those fit more cleanly into certain categories. And so the idea that they may, I don't know that it was requested in previous years, and so they may just have some that fit neatly in the categories.
So I'm hearing maybe a combination of, we should have some specific asks around the number of cases that relate to each of those, as well as a more general ask for the police department to maybe identify other data that they think may be pertinent. And in what format are we hoping to get Are we hoping to get information about how each of the expenditures relates to that? Or are we just hoping to get that in their annual report to us so that we can just kind of get an idea and use that information when we have that presentation, I should say, rather than the report. When they present to us, are we asking for them to include that just so we can contextualize the expenditures?
I think for me, I don't want to be overly prescriptive, and with every line item you have to provide a metric, but from like a basic level, as you know, transparency to citizens, I think it's helpful to, maybe the description of services is enough, but where it exists, if there are some just measures of some outputs that can be associated with this.
Oh, so like for each of the, like maybe adding another column to be like, which of the three does this touch on? Like,
I think that would be one way to approach it.
So it essentially would be a tally for each of the three issues that alternative policing addresses in every incident.
I'm thinking like for each, my understanding based off of that is like, potentially we had, the way I formatted is we had 3 columns for each of these, and we say, put an X next to the expenditure for each one of these 3 that this touches on, right? So is this expenditure related to homelessness, mental health, addiction, or some combination of those 3, right? And then that could be a way to like very quickly fill that out and get that in. Because I think what you're asking for is just some sort of evidence of what, or some sort of information about what is the intention, which of those 3 descriptors is this expense supposed to touch on?
Yeah, so like I look at, and maybe describe services provided will give us enough, but I look at SRO 1 FTE at 10%, and I think which, is that based on homelessness? Is that connected to addiction, to mental health? Maybe more likely mental health, but you know, what in the ballot language is that connected to?
So I think they're gonna have a hard time tying exact expenditures to, I think number of cases is probably reasonable, and then that might be something you separate a little bit from these top lines where they're saying an FTE, because they don't know when they go on a call.
Sure.
It's a call.
No, and it might be all 3 on.
Yes.
What I'm sort of envisioning in my head, this is my idea, is that we would essentially have a case number tally for each of the 3, and it might be all 3 in one situation or one pullover or whatever the incident is. And then we would be able to take the percentage of tallies over the total sales and use tax revenue for that annual year and say, okay, 38% was homelessness being addressed and 38% of incidents, you know, and then have a breakdown for each. So then we could actually assign the sales and use tax or sales tax amount by an allocation percentage. So we got $1 million in sales and use tax revenue, 38% was addressing homelessness cases. So 380,000 went directly to alternative policing and addressing homelessness. That's kind of what I'm envisioning.
And we can take this back to the police department and see what they do, what they can,
Yeah.
what they're recording now and what they can provide. Maybe that'll, I mean, if you guys can come up with your recommendations, we can go back to them and then they can work on that before we have our next meeting on this.
I think that approach kind of makes sense. Like, and I think too, we need to be looking at like, you know, this is a spreadsheet where we're getting information about the expenditures, right? But the other tool that we have is we have a presentation where they talk through stuff with us. And previously, that presentation has been tremendously helpful in contextualizing this, right? And we don't really want to make this too burdensome. We want it to be informative and easy to read. And, you know, I think like it may be worth asking the police department if it's easy enough to identify which of the three, if not multiple of those categories each of these touch on. But as far as like number of cases and stuff like that, I think instead of breaking it down like this expenditure touched on this many cases or things like that, it may just be worth generally having, hey, how many cases this year touched on addiction, and have that in the presentation. How many cases touched on this, it had touched on mental health, you know, and have that in the presentation. I think that's a different ask and a lot easier and a lot less administrative. You know, I think checking a box, the police officers are gonna have a pretty good idea of what, you know, zone policing probably is gonna touch on all. And they're gonna have a pretty good idea, like the impact team, you know, is more focused on this, but still worked a little bit in this area. So that's kind of.
Can you remind me, when the chief presents, does he have a separate segment of his overall presentation that he just kind of, it's almost like an executive overview of what they've been doing with the sales and use?
I don't think that they did last year, and I could be wrong, but as I remember, and I reviewed it a couple months ago, but that at this point it's flying by. So I think that they did talk about like alternate policing, but they didn't really say like, they didn't have like a sales and use tax section. They had like an alternate policing, and that was broken out in addition to like in their achievements, they mentioned like a ton of things that were related to the expenditures. And so we got a bunch of information there.
I wonder if a fairly administratively unburdensome way to do this would be to ask the chief to kind of carve out a section, or the deputy chief, whoever's presenting, that really just hones in on this and gets at some of the metrics that you're talking about, you know, the 3 focus areas and then the co-occurring incidents, things like that.
And we did plan on providing this feedback from tonight to them before their presentation so that they can build that in. So.
And also we have something in our dispatch system called the disposition code. So anytime a call is closed out, and they can tag it certain ways. So for example, a couple of years ago, we did start tagging them with an H code for calls involving homelessness. It's not perfect because they have to be self-reported for several reasons. In terms of things though that are deployed, like a deployment, like co-responder, I think those are relatively easy to track. But if you're looking for the categories in terms of types of calls, it's a little bit harder. Obviously, you can make deductions based on, you know, whether this was an impact team deployment or whether it was a, you know, co-responder deployment, what that call could have been. And the police chief can obviously go into greater detail about that, but we just don't have a ton of data around, you know, categories based on the disposition codes. And some disposition codes are much easier to track than others. Homelessness is a very, very difficult one to track, but it is one that we have been tracking for the last few years.
And I should say, I think that those codes were kind of what I had in mind. I think that those codes were one of the things that the city manager had highlighted and were, I believe, are on that list of like just potential things that the city manager had thrown out might be a possibility.
Can I posit a council perspective here for a moment? I don't want to direct your work, but the reason why these things are on the list is because the police department and the city manager thinks that these are alternative policings. And what I see as the task before you is an evaluation of whether or not we took the money that the residents gave us and applied it to alternative policing. And if that picture that is before you fits that, then good. And if you need more information to determine whether that picture fits, which is part of what I'm hearing, all the better. Because the message that I would like to communicate to the residents is just binary. Did we take your money and did we use it for what we told you we would use it for? Yes or no?
Great, no, I like that, thanks.
And I think one of the ways we could incorporate that suggestion is to have it formalized as a recurring element of our annual report.
Yeah, absolutely.
With this as the source document that backs it up.
I mean, there might be a point where we make changes to this or we lose our way. And the expectation would be that the Budget Advisory Committee, if they remain tasked with the audit, would tell us, we don't think this was quite the right place. And maybe we want to look at next year moving it in this direction.
Sure.
And I do also want to just note, and I understand that talking about people is much more complicated than pavement. But I also think that there needs to be some parity here and not making this overly onerous while still incorporating the reasonable amount of accountability that the councilman has called for. So that's what I'm trying to balance in my head.
No, and I agree. I don't like, I understand that, you know, some of these projects, it's easier to describe some of the projects around pavement, but I do think like, I don't want it to be like, here are a list of 30 requirements for the police department.
Right.
And Public Works, you know, do whatever.
Tell us about Broadway. Yeah, right.
No, that's true.
And I think there is a middle way in there that we can take both of those boxes.
And I mean, in reference to the sort of question that you had brought up earlier, Laura, my personal belief is that this committee has the authority to ask for whatever you think you need to get that done. And I will back that 100%. You know, you're all reasonable people and we're all grown adults in this room, so I don't expect that this committee would ask for, you know, a ream of case files or something to go through one by one, but if you decide that's what you need, I'm pretty sure we can make that happen. So.
Your confidence is appreciated.
I hope it doesn't come to that.
I was just saying, attendance may drop off at that.
We also hope it doesn't.
Yeah.
Does that get us where we need to go? And what would we like to send the police department in advance of our June meeting?
Yeah, so I think we should probably, I think we threw out a lot of ideas, right? So I just want to make sure that we're clear on going forward. And I think, you know, additionally, right, there are things, we have an obligation to make these determinations this year, right? And same as last year, we did the best with the format that we had and then came up with ideas for improving that format, right? And, you know, I know we've been having this discussion for a while now, but we're getting closer to actually needing to present this information to the police department and seeing what asks that they can do this year, right? I think there may be a difference between what sort of metrics and information we can ask for this year and what sort of information we should look to asking in future years. So I think with that in mind, what asks are each member of this committee looking for this year? And are there any asks that we know we want to look into for the future? Because I agree, I think Kevin raised a great point. You know, the police department knows best what information that they have. And while I'm not opposed, you know, if we really see the need, to the council member's point, of asking for something that's not being collected and we're not able to make a determination without it, that's a different situation and we should find a way to do that, but that takes time. So if we know something that we want this year, we should, you know, be pretty clear, and if there's something that we want in addition to that, we should look at that maybe further.
I'm willing to start on that. I, again, really would like to see column G completed in its entirety. It would be hugely helpful. I think I would like to see the chief or deputy chief, if possible, carve out a section of their presentation to specifically address how progress and challenges in implementation of the sales and use tax. And then not an ask of the police department, but a recommendation for our group is that we formalize it as a part of our annual report, so that, because I think that is, we are, by the language that you read, Peter, we are called on to do that in more than I think just the meeting minutes. So those would be my recommendations and asks.
And to your point, and to the point of making sure that, you know, we're fulfilling our obligation not only to review the police department, but also public works.
Right.
I think we should make the same ask for an inclusion of sales and use in that presentation as well.
Yep.
But I agree with you to those points. I think, of course, as I've railed on many times, I believe in separation of column G and H, and having those filled out. That's 100% I'm behind that, but I'm also behind just asking for that inclusion in the presentation and making sure that that happens annually. I think that sounds great.
I agree. And when you say column H, I mean, I feel like last year we kind of
Did I mean
didn't.
Well, last year G and H were one, and now they're separate.
Now they're separate.
Kind of hand in hand.
But remember, I think there was a little heartburn over just from the layman's side, you know, and the disclosure side and the sort of auditability of full-time employee percentage hours. I think that we didn't love that. Do we ask that be replaced with something, and if so, what? Or is that going to stay, and then we're going to addend this with what?
My concern was mostly just make sure that, like, some of them we got were like 2.5 employees, and some of them were like 2 employees at 25%. So as long as it's consistent, and I'm totally fine with the X FTEs at blank percent, because that's pretty standard. Whereas like I think we I think part of what you're referencing is it said like 3.25 FTEs, but we realized that that's 5 people or something, right? And that got kind of
on a percentage basis. Well, I would ask that maybe we just, instead of doing the full-time employees percentage, that we just ask them to convert those metrics into employee hours or work hours, case hours, instead of have a percentage of employee. Just what is that? 2 full-time employees at 100%. And maybe he says, well, we can't do that, or we take an average over a given month or a given week of work to come up with the estimated total full-time employee hours that were actually committed to zone policing, for instance.
But the expenditure is likely tied to the salary, like specific salaries
It
for
would
specific
be.
roles.
So, I mean, that might be onerous
And
to
I think
ask.
some of these people are hourly and some of them are salaried, but we maybe like have an estimation. It probably wouldn't include overtime. You know.
Well, I mean, it gets pretty sticky.
Sure. I'm not opposed to that that ask, I think that might be a good thing, like, to ask the police department, like, whether, like, to be totally honest, I think this meets my ask, but I think that makes sense if it's like readily doable by the police department. So it might be like see whether that, for me, I think that's like is this something that could easily be done by the police chief? And if not, I'm not like so concerned with it that I really wanna like push it.
Okay, if not, what is the police chief's recommendation? Is that fair?
Yep.
Jay's got his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I'm glad I'm getting in now. I think the discussion's been great. I think the full-time employee column H, it's good enough for me at the moment, but I guess I would be willing to see if there is another way they could put it so that's a little bit more clear. But my question to everyone else would be, if we can get column G filled out and have a better understanding of what the spending was, regardless of kind of looking at the column H, but looking at the total spend and then the description of the services provided. If we have that, can that get us to a yes, no answer so that we can then kind of solidify this and kind of I don't want to say just move on because of wanting to get done with this, but to be able to kind of solidify, is this good enough? Yes, no. Is column G an understanding going to get us there? I kind of think it will, especially kind of considering that, you know, the data being provided to us is from the people with boots on the ground, and this is how they've kind of said, hey, this is how we're going to show you the data.
I think that's a great point, Jay. And for me, I think the incorporation of the section of each presentation, including like a short section, and I'm okay if their presentation has to go a little longer than the
Absolutely.
previously set expectation because we're asking for an addition.
100%.
I think between that and the column, that is okay for me, but I'm willing to listen to arguments if somebody else has a reason why they want something else. And I think, and also, you know, I'm also supportive of us incorporating these and then evaluating, like, did this actually make it easier, or were we still missing something, or et cetera. That's me.
I think the only thing I would like to see in addition is just simply an estimated case percentage, so case number for each of the 3 alternative policing measures. So that essentially year over year, we could say, you know, last year we spent X percentage on homelessness, Y percentage on addiction, and et cetera. But that may be too onerous for them to say. In all honesty, I'm not a policeman. I know they do hundreds of reports potentially a day, and they may say, there's no way, Pete, fly away. We're not going to be able to do that. So I guess I just...
And maybe like approximate.
I think an approximate is acceptable.
And I think there would have to be a 4th category for co-occurring.
Right.
Instances, because I bet you a lot of them are co-occurring.
I wouldn't doubt it.
And for me, I'm just curious what they have in each of those categories. There may be things we're not even considering beyond case percentage. That is, this is a measure of this category, and so I'm okay with the ask being like, we want to see a few of those things.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, like, when we're asking, like, we can ask for that when, from the police chief. I don't know, you know, how much of that we're gonna get in order and be able to say, okay, great, now grab that detail for this year. But I think, like, we can ask, say, what detail do you have in each of these that you think would help us make the most sense of this? And then ask for that.
And the ask can be in the executive summary, in the presentation.
Right.
Just put, like, I don't know how much we want to specify it, but touch on each area, include some metrics and measurables here.
I think that approach makes sense to me, if everyone else is comfortable with that. I think, like, So it sounds to me like we have two concrete things and a couple asks about what's possible. And then based off of that feedback, we can decide, you know, is this something that we can implement this year, or is this something that we'd like to ask for in the future?
Okay. Understanding that in all reality, this won't be resolved until our June meeting with them.
Right.
Once we really get to hear the experts weigh in.
So we're concretely asking for the inclusion of this format and for them to fill out column G and H for everything, and the inclusion of a section for both Public Works and the Police Department in the implementation of the sales and use tax that will, and for that section to be incorporated annually.
Yes.
And then we're asking them, is it possible for column H, instead of the X number of FTEs at blank percentage, to have a approximate number of work hours?
Well, I don't know what you all think about that.
I'm okay
And
with
maybe
that.
that's a crazy, it's just an idea. So if
I
they
s-
say full-time employee percentage at times, you know, I'm fine with that.
I say ask the police chief if that's something
Okay.
that you think has value. I'm fine with asking the police
Okay.
chief. The police chief can say, of course we can do that, or we could do that, it's gonna take a lot of work, or that is gonna take so much time, there's no way that we're doing that, and based off that, we can have a different conversation. But I'm fine with asking. I
Great.
think asking what metrics in each of these make sense, and then asking, is it possible to have an approximate number of cases for each of these three categories, and a fourth approximate number of cases that includes two or more of these categories. And I think those are our asks. Did I miss anything?
I think you have it, so I'll put this in an email to the group this week, clean it up a little bit, and then.
So I have a question.
Yes.
When do we need to be able to say yes, no?
Is it June 24th?
I would say by the time we produce the annual report and call it July, end of
Okay.
July.
Last year, I think that we provided this before we provided the annual report.
I think that's probably
Leaves about checking.
true.
That's what I'm showing on our remaining calendar for the year, is that our June 24th meeting is to review sales and use tax and the 24 audited expenditures, and to draft our annual report outline.
Okay, so June. And then we should also formalize that deadline for this review for the city, for going forward.
And so the ask of Public Works and the Police Department that they kind of have a carve out within their presentation is actually for our next meeting on April 22nd, which is where I show both of them presenting on our calendar, if I'm reading this correctly.
So the presentation on the April 22nd is their regular presentation. And we did include a slide for each department, kind of in a preview, but we can put additional information in that presentation if you would like. I think the June 24th review will be a presentation from Public Works and Police Department with a lot more in-depth going over both the audit, but we'll also have a presentation.
I think last year we talked about the possibility of combining them for the benefit of staff, and then I don't think we ever came to a conclusion, so I think it remained as separate meetings to kind of for context there.
And so is the committee's direction to include the metrics and more in-depth data in the April 22nd presentations, or would you like just the preview and then have the metrics and everything and the more in-depth data just for the June 24th?
I think that the meeting will, and the presentation, and then our questions to come before April meeting will be sufficient for us to have the conversation with them, for them to say that's unreasonable, or here's what we can offer in exchange. And then we formalize that by June 24th.
And we'll share what you come up with tonight with them,
Okay.
probably tomorrow or the
Great.
next day. So they'll have some idea of what we're going to be talking about.
And Nevin, you were asking about kind of what are we thinking about in the future? If I were looking at this for next year, I almost wonder, should we really have one of our month's meetings just be for Public Works, including their general presentation and the sales and use discussion, and then have the other meeting be just for the police department? And that way, we're not asking them to deploy staff for 2 meetings, and we can just focus on pavement or people.
Yeah,
So there we go.
I know we talked about that last year, and especially with us, I know we've spent a lot of time this year on figuring out how to approach this. But I agree, I think like going forward, now that we have our heads on a little bit more straight, I think we can just save the staff time. And obviously I don't think we should change it for this year, but I think next year those can be 2 meetings, and we can just save staff from having to stay late another evening.
Agreed, yeah. Okay, anything else on that topic? I will send the email around and they will share our what we discussed with them, and my questions will include that information. I will preface reserve policy. Of course, we never get done quite what we want to, but we're gonna be a few minutes late already today. But next time, Stephen, Councilmember Ward, you did provide some background. I know even in some ancillary council meetings, I know you all have discussed this, but maybe for our April 22nd meeting, if you're here, or the May 27th one, if you wouldn't mind just providing a 30-second or 5-minute overview from what you had asked at City Council, and Rita is welcome to weigh in as well, but what you all expect from the reserve policy recommendation from the committee by what we'll call our annual report. So, and I wanted to do that tonight, but anyways, here we are. Members' choice? No, nothing, Jay?
No.
Okay, I will add Laura as, well, she's going to be appointed. Well, I have to write a letter of recommendation first, but we anticipate that Laura will be joining us as a full-time member for 2-year term.
So she is currently a full-time member.
Yeah.
She is reapplying to
Reapplying for second term.
the reappointment of her current position, as is Jay.
Great.
I did,
Awesome, Jay.
I did notice, it looks like we do need to update the listing for the BAC on the website. We still have member Lesage on there, and Laura is still indicated as an alternate.
I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Thanks. Wonderful. We're thrilled, and thank you, Laura, for all that you contributed thus far. So.
I think just knowing that we're going to get into the reserve next time, maybe to save some time, if anybody knows that they have something that they want for us to consider at that meeting, just to maybe bring that to Tyson to share with everybody, so that we can just maybe compile a list. It might save us a little time.
I agree, and you know, Tyson was kind enough to circulate the current policy along with the investment policy, which to me they're intertwined. So I think if you all would just familiarize yourself with those, and I will do the same. That will help us.
And we'll just have links in the agenda again for next month then.
Yes.
That's super easy.
Yeah, if we can just
We could do that.
resend those.
Sorry, Tyson.
I did so easy.
I will make no additional requests today or next month.
You make whatever request you need to get it.
Tyson, I will onerous requests.
Well, thanks, Tyson, for all you do.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so next meeting is April 14th. We're going to sit down with City Council, Planning and Zoning, and the Budget Committee to review the 5-year capital request. So bring your thinking hats and your questions.
It's going to be fun.
It'll be fun. Okay, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I tried, Tyson. 10 minutes late.
Good conversation.
Go out and enjoy the sun, right?
Yeah.